Well, actually, it was an accident. I was a traditional psychologist. I had my PhD in experimental psychology, and I was running rats, doing research on rats, and had an opportunity to go to this college where I would be able to run my own program. I was a little bit interested in administration, so I thought this would be a great job. It just happened to be an institution that specialized in adult learners, about which I knew virtually nothing. And it was also a progressive education institution, which I really did like and enjoy. And so when I took the job, suddenly had nothing but adult students as my students, and I found out I really liked working with them. Well, I think it's important to know its history. This is something that I didn't really learn that much about early on. I think I acquired that somewhat later. To understand this, a very interesting legacy of adult learners being people who simply want to learn in order to get along in this world. They want to, in order to solve particular daily problems, you want to plant strawberries, you look it up and you figure out how to plant strawberries. And that's part of adult learning. It isn't as narrow as going to a particular class designed just for adults, that you're learning really all the time. And I think that educators should be aware that they're kind of walking in on something that's ongoing. It's not something that they don't do. People learn all the time, and that you really want to kind of catch on to that trend rather than to think that it's all on you. That would be at least my early advice. Well, my goodness, it's such an interesting question. As a psychologist, I'd say that we usually consider the learning process to be the same whether you are 85 years old, 5 years old, or even, I guess, in utero, they've seen that there's some kind of learning. There's supposed to be some basic principles for learning no matter what. And that actually is probably true. Certainly how an adult differs from younger people is the motivations and reasons for what they want to learn, and perhaps what they want to learn. That might be different. But it is now turning out to be the case that adults develop. That is, they grow and change over time from one kind of individual to another individual. They become wiser, for example, have a more expansive perspective. So those changes also kind of impact the way in which you might learn, so that you might be more interested in questions of spirituality, say, that when you're 50 and you're suddenly wondering what life's all about, than when you're 18. So it's partly the questions that you might be asking, and it's the motivation, but it's also the way in which you might engage answers, so that an adult, it turns out to be, in many instances, more enjoyable to teach than younger students, at least in certain ways. Well, it is. I know that people have spoken about andragogy and pedagogy, distinguishing two forms of learning, where adults like to take charge of their learning and young children like to be told what to do. I think both of those methods of learning are learned. I don't think that they're really associated with age. That many adults come to us, and in higher education, which is what my primary experiences are. They've come to us with a history of seeing schooling to be where you're told what to know and what to learn and how to learn it. And so they're not necessarily prepared at all to take charge. In fact, they say, I'm paying you a lot of money. Why are you asking me to get involved here? But I believe it's just simply because they've seen no other option. And I think that the same could be said for young people, that if we originally started saying, hey, what do you want to learn? That they would learn also to take charge of their learning much earlier than they currently do. And in fact, I would say with the internet, I've observed my grandchildren learning a great deal from the internet, out from the reach of anybody else, learning how, my grandson wanted to learn about the French horn. What did he do? He went to the internet to do it, and he learned how to pitch baseball, and he learned all about pitching on the internet, all on his own. And he was 15, 14 years old. So in a sense, he was showing andragogy, which kind of makes those two terms, I think, a little ridiculous. So you should just understand there are two ways of learning, and they're not necessarily age associated at all. Well, I'm a fan of John Dewey's, and John Dewey described a way of education that we call progressive, which is that it's education based on the notion that life is always changing and you need to be prepared to learn anew over and over again in face of change. And therefore, having material deposited in your head, as like it is in a bank, is not very useful to you because you need to be prepared to be able to learn new things. So the education should focus on giving you those skills as opposed to having you just memorize and regurgitate so much. And a man named Edward Lindemann, he wrote a book in 1926 that was heavily based upon John Dewey's thinking, except it was about adult learners. And I think that that is a hugely important resource for people to see a very positive view of how the adult, who's a competent person, grown up, had kids, got a job, runs a home, they're not in a deficit people that are in need of help, that they're really quite competent people, and they're very eager to learn. And I think that would be an important conception that we should keep in mind. I also happen to be enamored with a book about adult development, which is also very closely tied to adult education, by Robert Keegan. He wrote it in, 1970, 60, 67, 60, something along there, called In Over Our Heads, in which he says that our current society is making demands upon adults and forcing them to develop more. And I think that book gives you a big clue about what kind of learning we need to engage in order to deal with the tremendous changes that are occurring in our lives right now. Many people are very unhappy with the political situation, and I think in many cases we simply don't have the resources to deal with the kind of contradictions that we're facing, the kind of challenges that we're facing, because the old ways of doing things aren't working, and we have to be able to give them up in order to establish and learn new things. And that book, I think, gives you a picture of where a competent adult will be able to deal with some of the complexities of today's world. So I do recommend In Over Our Heads by Robert Keegan, in addition to Lindemann's book. Well, actually, it's going in kind of a bad direction, actually. The competent adult, the view of an adult as a competent learner, somebody who goes out and learns what he needs in order to do, or what she needs to do, I guess, there's a competing picture of the adult who needs to have all these mandated learning. Say, if you're working in a job, you got to have a job to upgrade your skills. The assumption is you can't do it on your own, or you're not. Professionals are supposed to pass certain tests to make sure that they are able to stay up with their field. And what happens is it gives the people that have to take these courses delivered by other people, gives them a sense of incompetence. And what's happening today is that there are more and more and more mandated learning, more learning that is being mandated for the adult than ever before. And the more learning is mandated, the less the adult takes charge of their own learning. Let's put it that way. And there was a fellow named Ohliger, Ohliger, who wrote about this in the late 50s. He warned that we were making ourselves into a nation of incompetent people by constantly requiring them to take certain jobs and not allowing them to have more say in what it is that they needed and wanted to learn. And there's also a history of adult learning by Kett, K-E-T-T, and he noticed that trend too, that the competency of the learner is gradually diminishing in our eyes as more and more educators come along to say, we'll tell you what to do, we know what you need to learn, and that is actually not a positive trend. So I would guess that if we don't stop and recognize more often how our adult learners really can take charge, should learn to take charge, should be encouraged to take charge, we will make them more and more dependent upon educators to tell them what to do. And that, in my opinion, is not really a good future. Well, at my institution, we are able to give adults college credit for learning that they have actually done on their own. It could be in their workplace or volunteer work or hobbies or whatever. So we have a process by which they can request these credits. And I became involved in a project where we videotaped the first conversations these students had before they actually went into the evaluation process. It was basically a case where I or my fellow colleagues would sit down with their students and what did you know? What did you learn on your own? What would you be seeking to seek credit for? And so we would just start from scratch. I interviewed students who were preschool teachers, and students who worked in a factory, one student who was an immigrant, and her mother and father couldn't speak any English, and she had to be the interpreter for her. Students who worked in a beer factory, steel workers, and it was, these videotapes were an astonishing look into the nature of knowledge and the nature of learning, and raise questions about what should we be teaching, how does that knowledge fit within the realm of higher education, because again, that is my area. And we use those videos to begin to analyze the ways in which we help them articulate and organize and define what it is they have learned from experience. Well, I did mention John Dewey. He wrote a really short book in 1938 called Experience in Education. And since a lot of what adults do is learn from experience, I might recommend that people read that book too. Now, John Dewey was not writing about adults. He was writing presumably about high school students. But he doesn't mention the student's age much. And if you read that book, you could see that he is giving good advice about how to learn from experience for anybody at any age. And it's a very good kind of introduction to Dewey's thinking in any event, and I would recommend that as well, even though it's a little bit off the beaten track.